All right, friends, there's two parts to this sermon today, and I'm going to call them the easy part and the hard part. So the easy part, and here the people in Bible study can go, ooh. The easy part to me is the second part of this scripture, what we were calling in Bible study that David thing, and scratching our chins and wondering, that David thing, ooh. And I say, ooh, because I told the crew at Bible study, when they were asking about it, I don't know. I have no idea. I've actually never looked into this. You see, friends, I'm on my third time running through the 3-year cycle of the lectionary here in the Protestant church and in my career as a minister. And here I am looking at part 2 of the scripture today, and I can't even remember ever reading it, let alone ever interpreting it. So I told him, I don't know. It's Monday evening. I'll look into it. So I looked into it. Here's what we have. We have in this portion of Matthew, this section from, let's say, 21, 22, a lot of questions and tensions between Jesus and the religious leaders. The religious leaders ask Jesus a lot of questions, and there's a building tension between them. In just a bit, as we follow Matthew in the lectionary, we're going to see Jesus shift from talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees to talking to the public and talking to his disciples, often about the religious leaders. It's a point of reference Matthew keeps coming back to. But for now, still, we are in that messy middle where the tension is building between the religious leaders and Jesus. So a lot of questions are put to Jesus, as I said, by the Pharisees and Sadducees in this section of gospel. But today, we have something unique. In today's passage, Jesus gets to ask them a question. Jesus challenges them. And before we go further, let's put this in context for a moment. You see, Jesus and these religious leaders can argue and debate and question each other because they have a common heritage. It's worth remembering this. They have a common heritage, and they both embrace and revere the same sacred texts. It's worth remembering that Jesus is a Jew. He died a Jew, and in resurrection was a Jew. He wasn't a Christian. That term comes later. That's a term we placed on following Jesus. Just as Martin Luther, here with the Reformation coming up next week, just as Martin Luther would have called himself a good Catholic desiring reform in the Catholic Church, he wouldn't have called himself a Lutheran. We came up with that one. It's good to remember that context. And anyway, just the fact itself that Jesus and these religious authorities are questioning each other and arguing back and forth gives us the valuable context that Jesus was respected by the religious authorities of the time. He was respected as a scholar, respected as a teacher, a healer, a prophet. Remember, we often look at this from knowing the whole story after the Passion and knowing the Christ as we know him. But at this point, it's worth knowing the story isn't completed in this part of Matthew. And we can acknowledge the fact that the religious leaders would even give him the time of day and question with him of these common sacred texts. Tell us they respected him. It's all of this Messiah stuff that's really messing with the heads of the religious authorities. And I want to lift that up too. We're going to get to interpretation of this, but I want to lift up that as well, that religious hierarchy and how it has changed in some ways in our culture now, but not everywhere. I hope and I pray as a pastor that I have projected in my behavior, my preaching, my teaching, my life with you, a spirit of inclusion, equality, and humility. I hope I've done that so that any one of you would feel comfortable questioning and challenging me, even though I have the degree from seminary. Friends, we work through this together. We all have good questions. We all have places we're still learning. So I do sincerely hope you would question, you would challenge. But that said, would you ask the same questions you might ask me to the Pope or to any other well-known scholar or minister? Would you challenge them? Isn't it interesting how we still have a degree of hierarchy, even though we know God calls each of us uniquely? And to answer the question I gave to you, I hope you would. In fact, it was witnessing a number of kids in a youth group down in Anoka when I first came back to the UCC, came back to church, and I watched these kids feeling free to challenge and ask the pastor really good questions without feeling nervous or anxious about it. It was that made me want to go to seminary in the first place, because I surely wouldn't have done the same thing as a kid. In any event, between Jesus and the religious leaders, these questions are now not at all about the legitimacy of the law. They all agree on that. But it's about interpretation, how to interpret the law. So we know in our Christian context, and we claim and we testify that Christ was the son of David, from that lineage. And we refer back to the Old Testament prophets in support for this: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And we say, there, see, it was just as it was prophesied. Jesus as the son of David. But more importantly, Matthew clearly believes this. It's affirmed when we hear the accounts of the baptism of Jesus. What happens when Jesus is baptized? The heavens open up. And it's affirmed in the transfiguration, with the heavens opening up again in the bright cloud. In both times, that is baptism, transfiguration, God's voice says, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased." And at the transfiguration, there is that addition. After, "This is my son, the beloved, with him I am well pleased," God also adds, "Listen to him." Listen to him. Do we listen? Well, what does Matthew do with this acknowledgement? Here in the scripture today in Matthew, he quotes Psalm 110, authorship attributed to David, saying, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." And then Jesus asks, if David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? Dads don't call their sons Lord. And the key to this question we were asking on Monday, I think, is in that word from the quote of the Psalms, until. Until. It helps us to remember that here in this context, Good Friday hasn't happened yet. Resurrection hasn't happened yet. Jesus' ministry, as he's talking with the religious leaders, is not finished. He is, in effect, still becoming the Messiah. Let's sit with that for a second, because it's not something we often think about. We take the absolutism we know from the Passion and the Resurrection and try to project that to everything that happened before the Passion and the Resurrection. That's that until. From this authority, we claim to know the whole story. What we forget is the story is in the process of taking place. So I'm willing to bet this is the first time for many people that we've thought about it this way. Jesus in this time is becoming the Messiah. Interesting perspective we normally don't do. What Jesus is doing in this section is teaching the religious leaders that maybe, or telling the religious leaders that maybe all that they thought they knew about the Messiah might not be right. It's time to look at things a little differently. And that's the challenge presented here. To answer the question to the Bible study folks, let's look at it a little differently. And incidentally, this isn't just coming from me. I had some fun researching this, and collectively the interpretations, by and large, say that's it. It's a process of becoming and reimagining what the Messiah means to the religious authorities. This is subtle Jesus. Jesus being subtle. The same Jesus that was subtle in the speaking using parables. Because if he just comes out and says, I am the Messiah, the religious leaders can have him arrested for blasphemy, and he's out of their hair, and it's not time yet. But Jesus says, let's explore the notion that maybe you don't have things figured out as airtight and perfect as you might think. Make sense? Bible study folks, do I get a nod, or was that just me going in circles? I got a nod from one. Good. Friends, that's the easy part. The easy part was grabbing the books, reading the interpretations, digging into a question I didn't have the answer to on Monday. That's the easy part. The harder part is that first part. So let's remember, going through Matthew, at baptism, the heavens open, and God says, this is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased. And at transfiguration, the heavens open, and God says, this is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased, and adds, and listen to him. Folks, God says, listen to him. So let's listen to him, right? So it's a fair bet now, as Christians, that when Jesus says in Scripture, this is the most important thing, our ears should perk up and say, wow, our Messiah says this is the most important thing. You can't really diminish that, can you? And what is that most important thing? Love God and love each other. I heard this taught once as a heartbeat. Love God, love each other. Love God, love each other. This is what Jesus says is the most important thing. I picture Jesus telling us, look, all these messianic interpretations and justifications from the prophets of David, none of that means a hill of beans if you can't get that first part. If you can't get that first part, no matter how much you dance academically, historically, and whatever you might do, no matter how many prophets' names, whether you can recite all the books of the Bible, know the geography of every single place, know the whole lineage at the beginning of none of that matters if you can't get this first part. It's like talking about how to maintain one's endurance when running a marathon before you even learn to walk. Now, I'm projecting a lot of my own feelings onto what I imagine Jesus saying, but I think in hearing this context, you can see where I'm coming from. If God says, listen to him, and Jesus says, this is the most important thing, we should listen, right? So how do we, friends? How do we love God with everything we have? How do we love our neighbors as ourselves? Now you see why the first part's the hard part, right? How do we love God? Let's start there. How do we love God intensely? How do we love God absolutely? With all our heart, with all our soul. Let me actually put this in the personal. With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your mind. How do you do that? Have you ever loved something with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind? Honestly, do you know what it feels like? Take a moment now and imagine that in your life, that moment, that experience where you felt that absolute love. It's the question we asked each other in the Bible study on Monday. Do we know what it's like to love with that intensity? And I want to lift up the beautiful testimonies we shared. Beautiful testimony of the one that stuck with me and held with me was a story of someone holding their newborn baby for the first time. And that intense love with everything you could possibly have. Your heart, your soul, your mind, all there. And I told the group on Monday, I think I get it. I think I get it. And I think I also shared, I think I forgot it at one time. So I'm going to read, at the risk of repetition, some of what I shared in the Friday commentary as I'm contemplating all of this, and trying to figure out where we're going on Sunday, trying to understand how to share with all of you what we shared about that intense love, how to share that wake-up call in my own head that says this love. I wrote in the commentary, I think of all the things I have lost in recent years, mostly as a product of divorce, the loss of what I thought was a lifelong covenant, the loss of daily contact with my children, the loss of financial security and security of home, the loss of any semblance of known stability. Years later, it still feels as if the rug has been pulled out from under me. And most days, I get by. I adjust. I find nurture and care and stability in new and different ways. But this week, I realized one thing that I had lost, that I hadn't realized I had even lost: deep, intense, and heartfelt love. Don't get me wrong, I continued on this Friday commentary. I love many, many people in this new life, love many things, and still feel wonder and excitement, the joy of creativity and curiosity and playfulness. But what I'm referring to goes a bit deeper. I'm talking about the love I felt when I was called by God. The love I felt when I held my newborn child. The love that, without sounding too cheesy or idealistic, filled me and changed me in ways I never knew imaginable. The kind of love that after feeling, I could never be the same person again, ever. It changed me that way. And as I continue, at least I thought that was the case. We were talking about deep, intense love at Bible study on Monday and sharing our testimonies on the subject. And to me, hearing others share, it felt as I was looking at old photographs. Now you see where the children's sermon came in, connected. It felt I was looking at old photographs, trying to remember the vague details of a bygone time in my life. Well, that's sad. Yuck. And as I write this, there on Friday, I shared with all of you, I can't imagine anything more important in my life than finding and rekindling that absolute love. And I'm thankful to be in a community of faith that permits me to walk this path and share this path and this journey toward rekindling that absolute love once again. Thank you, friends. Thought it was worth sharing. As I try to be open as a pastor, this is my journey now. This is my faith journey, and the steps forward I go. And we count on each other. I don't think I'm the only one thinking now, wow, where did that love go, that intense, deep love? Friends, we all know it's inside of us. Can we, together, in the love that we share, rekindle that in each of us uniquely, just as we take a unique photograph of one and we say, I love you, and we take a photograph of the whole and we say, we love them. feel that inside. And that's important to share, because that second part, that God says, listen to him, and Jesus says, this is the most important thing. Remember that. This whole thing that I'm talking about comes from Jesus saying, this is the most important thing, as backed up by God. It's from that love inside of us that we can take on that second part of loving each other with our whole hearts, minds, and souls. And we step forward from there, friends. So let's begin through this week. As you walk through this week, as we share with one another, maybe call each other on the phone, give a quick hello as we're passing on the road, whatever the case it might be. Can we share the collective understanding that our goal this week is to feel that love, rekindle that love inside of us, in order that we might take on part 2. Does that sound fair? I know I'm being demanding here, friends. I think that's enough for this morning. Peace be with you, friends. Friends, let us sing together in number 337.